or good morning, depending upon what part of the world you're joining us from. I just want to take 2 seconds to say thank you so much for joining us as we launch this first of our new portfolio of teaching and learning and continuing professional development activities. I really just want to welcome you on behalf of the Society and allow myself to thank both Fiona Anderson, who was very much helping, but particularly Michaela, who has been the curator, as it were, of this wonderful first seminar series that we're embarking upon, and indeed Jenna Alsop, our administrator, who has done so much work to bring this all into play. We have a wonderful panel lined up for you for each of the evenings, and we're delighted that so many of you have joined us. Please think of participating in the Society in so many ways, whether attending these events, participating in our conference, submitting articles to our journal. We welcome you with open arms. But many thanks for joining us, and I hand over to Michaela.
So I'd like to reiterate what Claire said, to say thanks very much everybody for joining us. I'm Ellie Michaela Young, and I was appointed as one of the teaching, learning and continuing development officers alongside Fiona Anderson earlier in January this year. For those of you who don't know, the Design History Society is the leading subject association promoting and supporting the study of design histories both in the UK and internationally. And we do this through a journal, which is called the Journal of Design History, an annual conference and a program of events. We also act as an advocate for the subject in a number of different contexts. Membership of the Society is open to all and includes copies of the journal, access to all our awards and grants. And anybody who's interested and who's not currently a member can check out our Linktree page, which Jen is going to add in the chat, and it will tell you about membership and how to join, etc. So Fiona and I oversee a number of awards as part of the teaching and learning officer role. We have a couple of awards and events coming up over the next few weeks: the Student Essay Prize and the Design Writing Prize. Fiona recently recorded an interview with this year's Design Writing Prize, Jarrett Fuller. And again, if you check out the Linktree, you will see a link to the DHS podcast page where you can listen to that interview. We also have a number of workshops organised at the conference this year, which the conference this year is in Basel, Switzerland, and it's called Memory Full. So we have publication workshops organised, and Ty Kocic, our student officer, has a number of student forum workshops organised. Again, Linktree, it's all on Linktree. Oh, anyway, back to tonight. We initially conceived this event as a one-off, but we received an overwhelming number of responses, and we just thought it was too good an opportunity to pass up. And so we invited several of the speakers to take part in a new series that we created. Today's format, or today's event, is called Meeting the Challenges of Virtual Teaching. And the format we have planned is the speakers will present their papers for 10 minutes. They'll all present their papers. We don't have plans to have a break or anything like that during the session. So we're all aware that some of you might have Zoom fatigue, so feel free to step away whenever you like, and then just come back in. So the running order for today: first, we've got Russell Filtram and Patrick Fitzgerald, who are associate professors at North Carolina State University's College of Design in Raleigh. Pat has an MFA from Cranbrook, and Russell has a PhD in art history from the City University of New York. Today, they're going to explore some future possibilities of online learning through a presentation of a visual node-based interactive conversational interface prototype by creating unitized, customized video and audio explanations via content experts. The system hopes to enhance the online educational experiences using a natural and informal conversational model of audio and visual explanation. That's right, isn't it, Patrick and Russell? Okay. Second speaker is Yasmin Nachaib-Tan, an associate professor of art and design history and visual culture at the Lebanese American University, Lebanon. She is currently a visiting professor at Bilkent University in Turkey. She received a Design History Society research grant twice, first for her research on Mosul Basil Zanul, Imagining Beirut, 1960 till 1990s, and second for her research on Abdul Qadir Arnot's Designing as Visual Poetry. She's the author of Reading Marie Al-Khazin's Photographs, Salula Radul's Chinars. I'm pronouncing this so incorrectly, so please accept my apologies. Arab, not modern Arab design, and Hamil El-Tuni's Evoking Popular Arab Culture. She's also on the editorial board for Design and Culture. Our third speaker, Brian James, is a Brooklyn-based design educator with an MFA in graphic design from the Rhode Island School of Design. His perspective and practice are also informed by prior studies in philosophy and applied linguistics. Brian's professional work includes design and software development at award-winning studios for clients ranging from local educational institutions to global brands. Currently, Brian is focused on his academic interests as an assistant professor of graphic design at St. John's University in New York City. And the final speaker of the evening will be Yelena McLean, an assistant professor in the Department of Interior Architecture and Design at Florida State University. As a researcher, educator, and practitioner with over 15 years of experience in exhibition and museum design, her research engages with complex spatial forms analysis and employs a combination of quantitative and qualitative methods to explore relationships between interior configurations and users' perceptions and experiences within educational, museum, and public housing spaces. She investigates the institutional and social and cultural influences and consequences of these relationships. Dr. McLean's historical research ranges from spatial analysis of historical structures to mid-20th century modernism in the Soviet Union. So those are the introductions over. Jenna, are you ready to share Pat and Russell's presentation?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen now and I'll turn my camera off.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, we can't hear the sound.
I wonder if it was because I had my microphone muted. I thought it would just, I was hoping it was just going to run through, but I'll start again.
Okay, try again.
Put a thumbs up if it looks like it's all right, because I have to lose my Zoom screen as well. So I start.
Jenna, when you share, there should be a box that you tick that to allow you to have sound.
On Zoom?
Yeah, when you do the screen share.
Right.
Thanks, Sasha.
Thank you.
I've been here.
Oh, share sounds. Thank you.
Yeah,
right.
and then it's the sound.
Okay, okay. Right, here we go.
Good afternoon. I'm Russell Flincham, and this is my colleague, Pat Fitzgerald. We teach in the College of Design at NC State University, and we're very excited to share with you today a project that we've been working on for several years now, and that is what we have dubbed the conversational interface. And it's a approach that is especially tailored to students and museum collections, but we feel like it has greater possibilities for applications. That's one of the reasons we're bringing this forward today.
To quickly give you an overview of how it conceptually works, the content expert, in this case Russell, is standing behind the content and is explaining the content in both a slideshow format and then also a cascading sort of mind map in a sort of conversational related facts sort of way. You'll notice that there are these buttons here below that are to represent something like beginner, intermediate, advanced, FAQ, strange but true, something like that. So that as you go through the linear interface, you can also travel up in a conversational mode.
I'd like to just say that the example we were using, of course, was Eero Saarinen's famous womb chair, and that links to Florence Knoll, of course, and also to Charles Eames and his own approach to this kind of chair. And under our frequently asked questions, it might be, when did this chair first appear? But the did you know element might be something like, did you know that even though this is the first chair of its type, it's covered in cloth over sisal, which allowed them to nail the upholstery directly to the wooden underbody, which meant that Saarinen's chair made it to market a good 5 years before Eames's did.
So the problem that we took on is the physical museum, the fact that it is location based, that is that not everyone can visit it, and that it is open in a temporal sense, either via temporary shows or just the actual hours of the museum. What we're thinking is that, if someone were in an ideal world, you'd have an expert guide taking you around the museum, but this is not practical physically or fiscally, I suppose. So we came up with another idea, which is to use virtual reality in a museum experience. And we were lucky enough to, because of Russell's connections with the Gregg Museum, we were lucky enough to be able to use the Gregg Museum and rent it out for a day to test out our virtual example, which we made functional.
Let me just mention that the Gregg Museum is our university museum at NC State and contains an amazing 36,000 plus objects. So one of the aims of this is making sure that that collection can be seen by more people, and more people will be desirous of coming in to see the museum collection in person.
Yeah, so another way to say it is it doesn't replace the museum. We understand that, but it is a way to expand the museum's reach. This is the same slide as before. You can see that in one of our classes, we started to use VR as a vehicle for learning and basically learning about VR and its power. So anyway, it's you can see quite a thrilling experience for the students and for us as a experimental thing. Very quickly, I won't go through great detail, but this is, you can see at the bottom in the red, we have basically levels of explanation, which we talked about, the beginner, intermediate, and advanced, the mind maps, which Russell is pointing to, and then zipline paths, which we imagine would be these paths that, let's say, Russell or some other expert took through a body of knowledge so that later on, someone else could follow a particular expert's path, conversational path through a body of knowledge.
I got nothing on this.
Okay, so this is, it's my turn. So this is basically, it's so easy and compared to multimedia development, doing VR development, believe it or not, once you get rolling with the tool, which is easier than one might think. We developed a very simple template. And so the resident expert, Russell in our case, was able to immediately and off the cuff, and that's the key term, make explanations of things without any practice whatsoever. And that's what's quite amazing. So here is Russell in the virtual environment. And you can see basic things like this is very rudimentary, but the basic idea is that you could get navigation by hitting these buttons. You can barely see this yellow line around this painting, but you can click on that painting and immediately get transported to that area. But in the meantime, Russell would explain to you about, in this case, an introduction to the museum itself.
One of the things that makes this attractive is the idea that experts can be brought in and their recordings can be very brief. So it's easy to do multiple takes because most of these recordings, we found about 1 minute to be the correct amount of information to keep people from becoming mentally fatigued, to keep people intrigued and moving through the process that we've mapped out here, and to sort of feel out where their level is.
Right. So
Because,
it's a more personal tour in a way. So here's another interface feature, which is just a version of what we showed you in the template, which is as Russell speaks, different ideas or concepts that he has made off the cuff. In post-production, we would put these concepts up here. So as he speaks about, in this case, the telephone, these particular images will come up, as I said, in post-production. But comparatively speaking to animation and multimedia production, this process is, we found, quite easy. So additional benefits, as I said, extremely low production costs. That is key, and that is one that I, as a multimedia developer, know with great confidence why this is so effective, because we're leveraging what teachers already know instead of trying to extract it out and rebuild it again. It's also a way to think about an archive for a museum, as Russell mentioned, that not to replace the museum, but to extend it.
I think it's very important that we document exhibitions that are done at museums, and this is one way to do so affordably. Yes. And to have something other than just a walkthrough with a video camera for these presentations. It's also a great way to get people in the mindset of accessibility in terms of the presentation of material, et cetera. And to a degree, to oversimplify it, the technological bent is meant to appeal to a younger audience. And that's one of our serious challenges, is how do we get more people in their early years into a museum and exposed to the wide range of things that belong to a museum. Pat, you might want to take it here. They're at the Museum of Natural History.
Yeah, so this is a work in progress. It will actually be functioning in the fall, but you can see the same idea, but developed in another format. So this is actually the basement of the Natural History Museum, their archive. And these two young ladies serve as, one serves as the expert and one serves as the asker of questions. And then below here, you can see that on a Lazy Susan that's rotating, and this is a VR environment, you can, they would be talking about this particular artifact, in this case, the world's shiniest egg. And this, to me, is probably the most exciting slide, which is what the VR environment would look like. So as you clicked on the hummingbird or the ostrich or the map, that would go down into this little space between these young women, and that would then be discussed. So we're very excited about this concept called the conversational interface.
The major thing we're hoping to address here is costs, availability, and interest. And all of these are part of the formula that we hope we've addressed. And we'd be happy to entertain your questions, both now or via email.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Russell. Our next speaker is Yasmin. Yasmin, are you going to share your presentation? Remember, your microphone's muted as well.
Thank you for reminding me. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Loud and
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. I just need to, I think I need to share sound.
Have you got videos on it?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm just wondering, how did I do it? Oh, there. Okay, perfect. Okay. So, this is my first screen. Okay, so before I start, I want to thank Ellie, Claire, who we just met, Fiona and Jenna for organizing this event, and of course, all of you for attending. So in my short presentation today, I will walk you through the challenge that I faced in teaching the history of graphic design class during the social unrest in Beirut, moving forward to teaching the same course and facing a different set of challenges, this time in Turkey. So I teach at the Lebanese American University in Beirut, and now I am a visiting professor at Bilkent University. And so while faculty around the world started online teaching in winter 2020, we in Beirut started in October 2019, when demonstrations erupted in Beirut, and faculty had to swiftly and without any previous experience switch to online teaching. On the left side of the slide is a sample of the online teaching environment. On the right side is a sample of the scene outside my window. So I just... Oops, sorry. Lebanon's universities have emptied out into the streets was the headline in the daily circulating news. Students were torn between taking part in major sociopolitical change in the history of Lebanon or completing their education by sitting in front of their screens. Taking the streets and joining the protests was obviously more appealing to them than staying home attending virtual classes on the history of graphic design. This prompted a number of questions in relation to the role of educators in times of unrest. Do we penalize the students for not attending classes or encourage them to participate in an unprecedented collective act that was calling to imagine a different or a better Lebanon? The streets of Beirut were gradually turning into an art gallery, if I may say, or street museum, with all graffitis emerging on the walls of the city. There were even sculptures, installations, and performances. This is when I realized that the only way to convince students to attend my online class was to integrate material pertaining to the uprising. And the way I did this was, first, by switching the format of the class from a lecture class to a seminar in which questions were raised on the role of the designer in times of uprising. How can they, as designers, use their creative potential to demand change? The class discussion shifted from the basic content addressed in teaching such a class to thinking of strategies that can be used by designers to overthrow the political system in the case of Lebanon. How can designers call for social change in developing content, whether online using social media platform or intervening physically by designing banners, flags, t-shirts, and other paraphernalia? Second, linking the content of the course to the students' lived experience proved to be an effective way to maintain their engagement in learning. I moved forward with the material commonly taught in this class, breaking the linear structure commonly used in addressing the various arts movements and their influences on designers, to focus on practices of critical resistance, protest, creative dissent, as seen in the, for example, in the Dada movement and the Futurist Manifesto. I also use the postmodern approach in addressing the need for designers to move forward by bringing up notions of quote unquote citizen designer and socially responsible design. And third, I integrated material and previous Arab designers whose work focused on earlier political confrontations and civil dissent, such as the first slide is Emil Menheim, the second is Dia Al-Azzawi, and the third is Helmi Touni. Emil Menheim is from Lebanon, Dia Al-Azzawi from Iraq, and Helmi Touni from Egypt. This material has been recently published by Khat Books, a publishing house based in Amsterdam that focuses on design and designers from the Arab region. So this all happened during a time when little did we know that the world will move into a long stretch of virtual teaching. A year later, in September 2020, I moved to Turkey to teach the same undergraduate course, but this time to a different group of students and in the midst of the pandemic. I arrived to find a beautiful but unusual empty campus. So this is the campus on the right. You can see an image of it. Up until today, I have not met many of my colleagues nor my students in real life. Teaching online courses in a different institution and across different cultures exposed me to various unexpected challenges. The class at Bilkent University was offered to non-design majors, so I had students coming in from different disciplines, engaging with graphic design and graphic design students. I taught a diverse group of students coming in from different places around the world, ranging from Albania, Iran, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Syria, and of course, Turkey. On my first Zoom class, I was faced with a screen on which 20 students had chosen profiles of hamsters and dogs. I didn't see any humans in my class during the first class. And this is when I realized that I need to establish a kind of connection with the students and maybe convince them to somehow make themselves visible. So how to do this? I said that this is important for us to see each other. After all, it's a course about seeing and being seen and how to see, and that we needed to break the ice and make ourselves visible in order to eliminate the screen boundaries and feel our presence as if we were in a face-to-face classroom. To establish this connection and get to know the students better, I reduced the lecture time again and increased discussion time to engage the students in socio-political debates. I have to say, the interdisciplinarity of our field, linking theory, design, education, and practice in response to socio-political issues provided this opportunity to engage the students in discussions pertaining to notions of identity, culture, specific expectations, and aspirations. While the focus in Beirut was to introduce the students to design culture from the Arab region, expanding on Arabic typography, that was an important addition to the course, the History of Graphic Design course content. Learning about Arabic type was not on the agenda for teaching design in Turkey. The students were not interested in learning about Arabic type. So I think, allow me here to briefly explain the reason for this resentment to the Arabic letters. by adding a bit of context. So going back in history and up until the late 1920s, Turkish used to be written in the Arabic alphabet. It was Ataturk who, as part of his modernizing social reforms, introduced a major change in writing Turkish using the Latin alphabet instead of Arabic. This is an interesting example for how typography becomes a political statement. That is the aspiration of the Turkish people to move from being part of an Eastern Islamic-oriented system to a Western secular-oriented direction. So again, to maintain the students' interest in the course, the content had to be adapted to the local culture's interests, particularly when the course is taught only we tend to lose the students' attention by the mid. So we tend to lose the students' attention by the mid-semester if the topic is not engaging enough to the students. So I therefore dropped the part on Arabic type and Arabic typographers and focused instead on integrating material on Turkish designers. And I'm not really familiar with Turkish designers, so I had to do some research. And in collaboration with my colleagues, I was able to gather some interesting work, fascinating work, actually. So Turkish designers dealt with it in a different way. They developed a fascinating hybrid visual language while being influenced by a range of cultural references, as you can see in the selection of these Turkish posters that were mostly produced around the 1970s. So we can see, for example, in the second poster, the Byzantine influence. In the third one, her blue balance typographic style that is very obvious as an influence here. And in Altin Tash's poster, the last one is the, I don't think you can see it, unfortunately, but it's basically East European Polish style influence. Since the class was online, instead of asking the students for a written paper, I asked for a pre-recorded group presentation. Students teamed up in pairs, divided the task of researching and sharing their presentations that combined visual and textual material on a chosen designer beyond the so-called Western canon. In this way, the students actively participated, compiling data and building material about marginalized designers whose work is overlooked in the textbooks commonly adopted for the History of Graphic Design course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. Before we move on to our next speaker, Brian, can I just remind everyone to turn off their microphones so that the speakers don't get feedback when they're doing the presentations? Thank you. You can take it away, Brian.
Okay, great. Let me just share my window. All right. And can everybody see that? Perfect. Yep. Great. So hi, everybody. This is my first DHS engagement, so happy to be here, very excited. I'm Brian James. I'm an assistant professor in the graphic design program at St. John's University in New York City. And I'm coming in today with a very humble workaday sort of offering, but I think it's one that actually has some really important ramifications under the surface. At least for my teaching, it does. So I hope that some of these ideas could be useful to some of you as well. Now, I've been experimenting with creating tutorial videos to supplement my classes for a few years now. And tutorial videos are a pretty popular format. I think we're all familiar with the genre, but just to be clear, I mean a step-by-step explainer video that shows how to do a particular task or part of a project, as opposed to recording factual lectures or critiques. And my tutorial videos in classes till now have been as simple as a how to tile print a poster video, or as complex as a multi-part series on creating a video game in Unity. So with last year's rush to the online format due to the pandemic, these kinds of videos became much more prominent features in my classes. And upon reflection, I believe that they should remain so going forward as well. So in this sort of whirlwind overview, I'd like to share some thoughts around creating and deploying tutorial videos in my studio-based design sort of practice-based classes, as well as a lecture-based survey class for non-arts majors. So starting with the pragmatic aspects, the production of these, when I first started making tutorial videos, I was just super focused on optimizing the audio and video production quality, making it slick, making it look professional. And I got really excited about that. I splurged on some new equipment and software and edited everything in Premiere to try to make it fancy. But it quickly became really overwhelming. And after getting feedback from the students, actually, it turned out to probably be the least important area of focus. So my first realization there was to really keep things simple and not get bogged down by technical production values, but instead this let me spend time on some fundamental factors that turned out to make the videos much more effective. So some of the big ones that I noticed were cutting longer videos into smaller separate ones where possible, and having time codes in the description, making videos more navigable, more convenient, which actually increases the likelihood then of the students actually using them because they don't have to wade through a ton of material just to get to the one portion that they needed. In the courseware, I make links to any given tutorial video from multiple logical places. So of course, there's sort of a master list, running list of all the tutorial videos that I post up, but I'll also link each video from any of the related project briefs that we're working on that might use that skill, and any daily assignments that might need it. And I'll put an announcement on the class homepage. So just creating multiple points of discovery for whenever, whatever moment a student realizes that they need it. Even something as simple and mundane as just being sure to name the video descriptively truly makes a difference in uptake. And all of this takes a little bit of extra time, but I find that posting videos in this way increases my students' accountability to getting projects done on time and to a high standard. And it also saves me time in other places because the students can often answer their own questions, or I can give them a quick pointer to the right video if questions arise between or even during classes. Now, of course, the smoothest practical process will vary from person to person. What works for one class may not work exactly for another, but I think in any case, the main focus should be to bring out these strengths of these instructional videos as an addition to the class. And that transitions into the second part of my talk on certain principles or broader issues that I've observed along the way. So first, I've seen that tutorial videos have really increased the accessibility of my classes. So for my students with learning modality issues, like say dyslexia, who have questions in between classes, I'm not limited to just typing out, extensive written email replies or giving primarily text-based handouts, because students now have access to sort of the core audiovisual walkthrough instruction itself as needed whenever they need it. For students with challenges like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that tutorial content is repeatable at will, and it can be chunked into more manageable sizes, like I was mentioning before. For students whose geographic or economic situation leads to unreliable internet connectivity at home, the content is on demand, so it can be reviewed asynchronously whenever or wherever the student can access the internet reliably. And sort of like the story behind the OXO can opener, I think this increased accessibility has proven really useful for all of my students, not just ones with sort of documented accommodations, so truly everybody benefits. Second, I've found the tutorial video approach to be helpful in enriching my lecture-based classes as well, not just with studio courses. Even though it may seem intuitively like tutorials, well, that's only for like a studio practice-based class. So in that non-major survey course that I mentioned before, this past fall was the first time that I taught it in an online modality. Previously, I had only taught it in person. And a major trend in online instructional design suggests curation as an approach to course creation. So the instructor combines their own original material with found material, high quality articles, professionally produced videos that are all online, and so on. Now, I think that the tutorial format is actually a great match for this strategy. So using a tutorial-like approach, I created my own original content that would glue that curated course content together. Even for the reading and the writing assignments, I actually made tutorials, explainer videos of how to take that, the found materials that I'm linking to, and how to use that raw material to construct their writing assignment, how to do research, how to do a close viewing of an artwork and respond to it, in really the same way that I would teach a studio class how to combine a set of images and typefaces and copy to create a poster. And I found that the resulting writing from these online asynchronous students this past fall was, from my perspective, it was better, appeared more engaged with the material than my previous in-person experience, which actually really surprised me. One of my students even emailed me after the class ended, totally unsolicited, and shared this really great feedback. Sort of noting, he said, like, he probably didn't maybe get the full experience. A lot of students are, we talked about Zoom fatigue, right? But he said that the class was really the highlight of his semester. Prior to it, again, these are all non-art or design majors, so sort of discovering a new passion here and even identifying a new personal goal that maybe arose, at least in part, out of this class, which again, it was 75% reading or viewing informational content and doing written responses. So it really, it really pleased me and exceeded my expectations in terms of engagement. And I do think that having a clear how-to tutorial approach was a big part of driving that engagement with the students. And that notion of engagement brings me to the final principle, parasocial relationships. So this topic is more on my future radar to be developed, not necessarily one that I've particularly resolved, but a parasocial relationship is a one-way relationship experienced with a person who one doesn't actually know, either real or fictional. So think your favorite characters from novels and films, celebrities, people who we feel like we know and have an emotional connection to, but who don't actually know us, or they might not, even exist. Now, of course, this isn't perfectly applicable to teaching even online, but I do think that in certain class formats, especially asynchronous classes where pre-recorded videos are the primary format, I think that they definitely skew towards that parasocial zone. So, and this next part is really purely speculative, but I think there's also something unique about the way that a presenter and an audience relate in the context of one of those tutorial or how-to style goal-oriented presentations that is somehow different from a purely lecture or documentary style presentation. And so as I move forward, I want to look more deeply at how parasocial relationships apply to making tutorial content, how to maximize positive aspects, such as generating greater student engagement, perhaps being a more approachable relationship mode for people with social anxiety, while also minimizing the negatives, like the tendency to relate to the viewers or the students as a mass audience rather than as individuals. So in conclusion, I found making tutorial videos to be really valuable in my design and art classes, and I think they are well worth considering in the post-COVID landscape too, both for online and in person, and studio, and even in potentially some more lecture classes. So these were just some quick reflections, but if any of these topics stood out to you as particularly useful, or if you have suggestions for how something like this could get more formally developed, especially in publishable artifacts, because I'm still on the tenure track, please do let me know. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ryan. The final speaker is Yelena.
Thank you so much. I will share my slides and we will proceed. All right, can you see my slides? Excellent. All right. 1 second. Good. All right. So thank you so much, Ellie, Fiona, and Claire for inviting me to share my experiences from the last 2.5 semester virtual and hybrid teaching. And thank you, our audience, for joining us as well today. So about this time last year, we were asked to modify or even reinvent our design history classes for online teaching. This is when I came across a 1996 article by Victor Margolin in which he talked about the challenges of teaching design history. Margolin emphasized design as, quote, a practice that is continually inventing itself. And he observed that, quote, we need to take this dynamic trajectory into account when we introduce students to the subject matter of design. Speaking of dynamic trajectories, the practice of education had changed literally overnight. We found ourselves in new technology-mediated learning environments that called into question many of the conventions of classroom teaching. Across disciplines, student-centered pedagogies have been informed by Vygotsky's constructivist theory of development. And in my presentation, I will consider how Vygotsky's ideas may be applied to design history, particularly in the context of online teaching. Vygotsky's cultural historical theory stresses the social origins of human behavior, which lays in social interactions between individuals, in their relationships between each other, and their relationships to the objects that people create. Intellectual development first evolves in the group in the form of relations between group members, after which it becomes a more discrete mental function of individual personality. Vygotsky was interested in how learners make progress, and in his work he described 4 stages of child development. The first stage is the primitive or behavior or primitive psychology in Vysotski's, to use Vygotsky's terms. This stage relates to a student's attempt to remember as much of the new unfamiliar material as possible using tools available to them. At this stage, such factors as attention, individual memory, and interest in the subject matter are very important. Students who first come to our design history class may be at this stage. This is why it is crucial to make introductions stimulating, engaging, interesting, and relevant for students. The second stage emerges after the introduction to the subject matter. Vygotsky called the second stage a naive psychology. At this stage, students may develop an individual method of memorizing new material, solve simple tasks based on their initial experiences, or they may engage with the teacher for help. Then comes external cultural method stage, which is characterized by a streamlined process of memorization, supplemented by the student's ability to connect objects and concepts based on discrete and definable characteristics, which eventually leads to discovering new connections. Vygotsky viewed these first 3 stages as external, defined by social interactions with peers and teachers. These are the stages in which scaffolding, in the form of questions, discussions, or hands-on group work, is widely used. The last stage marks a transition from the social process of learning to the internal schemata. The student doesn't need to use scaffolding or help. They have internalized the objects, associated characteristics and concepts, and processes of analysis. This is the stage at which students start using schemata they developed in the first 3 phases to solve similar tasks and tasks with modified parameters. So Vygotsky stresses that teaching must evolve development forward, not dwell on yesterday's accomplishments. So when we focus on what a student can do independently, we emphasize their past development. When students worked collectively with each other or with their teacher, this is the future-oriented development. This is when the future-oriented development happens. In his 1926 book, Educational Psychology, Vygotsky set forth his foundational theories about educational process, and with student individual experiences and social environment as its primary components. The teacher's role actually was secondary. To quote Vygotsky, the educational process must be based on the student individual activity, and the art of education should involve nothing more than guiding and monitoring this activity. And another quote, the social environment is true lever of the educational process, and the teacher's overall role is reduced to adjusting this lever. So these three components, the individual students, the environment, and the teacher must work together for the educational process to work successfully and to be meaningful. Content is part of the environment. Pedagogies are the tools that teachers use to shape the environment. And more from Vygotsky, quote, if lifeless objects, when they are brought into the educational arena, when they are assigned to an educational role, they acquire a sense of purpose and become effective participants in this process. Technology is one such lifeless object. It has assumed the role of mediator between teachers and students and between content and pedagogy. Technology is a dynamic tool that teachers can use to skillfully and creatively shape educational environment. To quote Vygotsky again, the teacher fashions, cuts up, shreds, and carves up the elements of environment, and then combines them together in the most diverse way imaginable. Thus, the educational process is active on three levels. The student is active, the teacher is active, and the environment created between them is an active one. In the technology-mediated classroom, where participants are physically separated, our challenge is to facilitate a sense of co-presence and to create an active and engaging environment. Common virtual Zoom spaces are no surrogate. We all have faced the field of black rectangles or other avatars at best. In designing my two-semester History of Interiors course, I used Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and four-stage development processes as guiding framework for organizing the content and assignments. Some things worked better than others, and here are some of my reflections and what I did. Vygotsky emphasized the need to get students interested at the very beginning of the class. So I opened my interiors history sequence with a 5-class series or 5-class lecture series focused on the cross-cultural history of everyday interior architectural elements and objects, such as fireplaces, chairs, interior lighting, windows, and toilets. This approach allowed for the introduction of personal narratives from me, from students, a variety of geographic and cultural perspectives to illustrate that there is no single interiors or design history. This sequence aligned with Vygotsky's stage 1 and 2, where students learn key vocabulary and key concepts. Then I also introduced multisensory experiences, such as, for example, playing music to illustrate each course's content. We all know about connections between music and architecture, and I sought to enrich student relations and connections with what we are seeing on the screen through this supplemental musical experience. I also oops, sorry. I also introduced small format engagements with emphasis on storytelling, writing, and sketching. Each interiors history class included a short assignment in which students had to find an image of designed object or interior element relevant to a particular class's and content and share it through Padlet format that you see illustrated in the right-hand side. I also used Zoom polls to ask students about their preferences and thoughts on the discussion content. For example, here you see I asked whether fireplaces have future in designed in interior spaces. And as you see, most students thought that we will continue having this old interior feature. Or I asked them to illustrate to provide sketches for some of the content. So the feedback from students was very positive. For example, they said, pop quizzes kept me on my toes throughout the semester. Or using discussions is a great way to involve students in Zoom, and this is particularly important in pandemic times. Or like the third student said, I like that you started implementing discussions for each class, especially for Zoom setting. It helps to keep people engaged with the class and not to hear the same people that tend to answer everything every day in classes. So, and lastly, the assignment that aligns with Vygotsky's third and fourth stages of development is the Object Theory History in 30 Questions project. This is the assignment that was developed by Matthew Bird, Gail Gowdy, and Brockett Horn during the Teaching the History of Modern Design National Endowment for the Humanities Institute I participated in 2015. So I modified this assignment to fit my interior history class. And for this assignment, students had to select an interior, a piece of furniture, or a decorative object, and they had to describe it from historical, social, functional, and history of production perspectives. And again, the feedback, you see examples of student work here on the screen, and the feedback was very positive from students. So on this slide, I just feature what worked and what didn't for the class, but by now my time is limited. So I just wanted to conclude by saying that in this presentation, I tried to show how Vygotsky constructivist theory can be adapted as a, from my perspective, very effective framework for developing online design history pedagogy. Technology can facilitate flexible knowledge construction, one where teachers and students all become learners, and learning becomes a creative process, a collaboratively produced phenomena shaped by culture, context, and co-generated communication. Thank you so much, everyone.